Welcome to Compact History from compacthistories.com, where we explore the stories, events, and moments that shape the world, in short, bite-sized episodes. This is episode 131, The History of the Metric System. Before measurement had a common language or most of human history, measurement was local, practical, and often deeply confusing. A foot might be based on the length of a human foot, but whose foot mattered depended on where you were. A pound, an ell, a bushel, or a league could mean different things from one town to the next. In markets, fields, workshops, and ports, measurement was not just a technical matter. It shaped taxation, trade, wages, land ownership, and trust. This was not simply a case of old-fashioned people being careless. Local measures had grown out of local needs. Farmers needed to measure grain and land. Cloth merchants needed to measure fabric. Builders needed workable lengths for timber and stone. Sailors, soldiers, and tax collectors all developed their own habits. Over time, these customs became embedded in daily life, even when they made wider trade awkward. In pre-revolutionary France, the problem was especially severe, with many different systems of weights and measures in use across the country before 1789. The difficulty came when local life met national ambition. A merchant carrying goods across several regions might have to convert between different units repeatedly. A tax official could find that a measure used in one district did not match the same sounding measure used elsewhere. Ordinary people could be cheated accidentally or deliberately because neither buyer nor seller always shared the same understanding of quantity. Measurement, which ought to have settled arguments, often created them. By the 18th century, the rise of science made the old confusion look increasingly intolerable. Astronomers, surveyors, engineers, and chemists needed measurements that could be repeated and compared. A discovery made in Paris had to be understandable in London, Berlin, or Philadelphia. A bridge design, a chemical experiment, or a map could not depend on a unit that changed from village to village. Science was beginning to speak internationally, but measurement still had a thick local accent. The Enlightenment added a powerful idea. Society could be redesigned by reason. Laws, calendars, coins, and institutions were all being questioned. Why should measurement be any different? If a nation could create a rational legal system or a decimal currency, perhaps it could also create a rational system of weights and measures. That ambition would find its moment in revolutionary France. The old monarchy fell, old privileges were attacked, and reformers looked for ways to sweep away the inherited clutter of the past. Measurement suddenly became part of something much larger than trade. It became a symbol of order, equality, and modernity. The next step was to invent a system that did not belong to one king, one city, or one profession, but to everyone. The French Revolution did not create the desire for better measurement, but it gave that desire political force. In 1790, Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, then Bishop of Autun, pushed the issue before the National Assembly. The idea was not just to tidy up weights and measures, it was to replace a patchwork of inherited customs with a universal, rational, and decimal system. And in a revolution obsessed with rebuilding society, that was important. French reformers wanted a system that could not be dismissed as merely French. If the basic unit was based on a royal standard in Paris, other nations might reject it as national self-interest dressed up as science. So the new system needed a foundation that appeared natural, permanent, and universal. The earth itself seemed to offer the answer. On the 19th of March 1791, the metre was theoretically defined as 1/10 millionth of 1/4 of the terrestrial meridian, meaning the distance from the North Pole to the equator along a line passing through Paris. It was an audacious idea. Instead of borrowing from the human body or a local artifact, the new unit would be tied to the size of the planet. The French Metrology Institute describes this as the moment when the metre became the base of the new metric system, though the practical measurement still had to be completed. That practical work was entrusted to two astronomers, Jean-Baptiste Delambre and Pierre Méchain. In 1792, they began surveying the distance between Dunkirk in northern France and Barcelona in Spain, using that measured arc to calculate the larger meridian. It was painstaking work even in peaceful times. Unfortunately for them, the 1790s were not peaceful times. France was at war, suspicion was everywhere, and men travelling with strange instruments could easily be mistaken for spies. NIST notes that their survey took around 7 years before the result was submitted and embodied in a platinum prototype metre. The metre was only the beginning. A complete system needed units for mass, volume, and area, all linked by decimal logic. This was one of the great advantages of the metric idea. Instead of wrestling with 12 inches to a foot, 3 feet to a yard, 1,760 yards to a mile, or similarly awkward chains elsewhere, metric units could rise and fall by tens, hundreds, and thousands. The decimal point did the heavy lifting. On the 7th of April 1795, France introduced the decimal metric system by law. The new system included the metre, square metre, cubic metre, litre and gram, among other units. It was a dramatic simplification, but also a dramatic intrusion into daily life. People who had spent their entire lives buying, selling, cooking, building and farming in familiar measures were now being asked to think differently. The revolutionaries had created the framework, but passing a law was easier than changing habits. To become real, the metric system needed physical standards that people could copy, inspect and trust. A system based on nature still had to be turned into objects. Shopkeepers, engineers and officials could not measure with an abstract idea of the Earth's meridian. They needed rods, weights and reference pieces. That meant the revolutionary dream of a universal system had to pass through workshops, laboratories and archives. By 1799, France had created physical standards for the metre and kilogram. The metre was represented by a platinum bar, while a platinum mass represented the kilogram. These became known as the metre of the archives and the kilogram of the archives. On the 22nd of June 1799, the French Republic adopted the new platinum kilogram standard, which NIST describes as the kilogram of the archives, after the building where it was kept. The kilogram had an elegant relationship with the rest of the system. It was intended to correspond to the mass of 1 litre of water, with the litre itself linked to the cubic decimeter. In other words, length, volume and mass were not separate kingdoms. They were connected. A metre could generate a decimeter could generate a litre, and a litre of water could help define a kilogram. For a world used to tangled measures, that was wonderfully neat. The system also gave people a consistent vocabulary of scale. Prefixes such as kilo, centi and milli made it possible to move up and down by powers of 10. A kilometre was 1,000 metres. A centimetre was 1/100th of a metre. A millimetre was 1,000th. Once you understood the pattern, you could apply it across different types of measurement. It was measurement with a grammar. Still, the early metric system did not benefit from instant public acceptance. Revolutionary France was not a calm classroom. The country was dealing with political violence, war, economic stress, and rapid institutional change. Asking people to adopt new measures while everything else was changing was a bold move. For many, it felt less like rational liberation and more like another order from distant authorities. There was also a practical difficulty. Old measures had names, habits, and emotional familiarity. People knew how much bread, cloth, wine, or land they were discussing because they had grown up with those terms. New units could be logical and still feel alien. Decimal simplicity did not immediately beat lived experience. It had to be taught, enforced, printed, manufactured, and repeated. Even in France, the path was uneven. Napoleon later allowed some traditional names to return in modified form, partly because public resistance was real. But the metric system had a strength that older systems lacked. It was coherent. Once schools, industries, armies, and administrations began to use it, its advantages multiplied. It could be copied across borders without carrying the local baggage of French customary measures. The metric system had been born in France, but its creators had always imagined something larger. The next question was whether the rest of the world would accept a French revolutionary invention as a universal tool. The metric system spread slowly because measurement is not just mathematics. It is habit, memory, and infrastructure. Changing it affects road signs, shop scales, school books, recipes, maps, machines, contracts, legal documents, and manufacturing tools. Even when a new system is clearly simpler, the cost of conversion can feel immediate, while the benefits arrive gradually. In the 19th century, metric adoption followed politics, trade, and administration. Territories influenced or occupied by France encountered the new system early. Other countries watched with interest, caution, or suspicion. The scientific argument was strong, but the political association with revolutionary France was not always helpful. For Britain, the United States, and parts of Europe, the metre could look less like neutral reason and more like a foreign import with French fingerprints all over it. Over time, industry changed the calculation. Railways, factories, engineering projects, and international trade all rewarded standardization. A machine part manufactured in one country needed to match a machine in another. Scientific data needed to be comparable. Military logistics, maps, and medical work also benefited from shared units. The metric system was no longer just a philosophical project. It was becoming a practical necessity. The decisive international step came on the 20th of May, 1875, when the Metre Convention was signed. Its purpose was to support the international unification and improvement of the metric system, and it created the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, known by its French initials BIPM. This gave the metric system an institutional home and a mechanism for international cooperation. That mattered because standards must be maintained. A metre or kilogram cannot simply be declared once and then forgotten. Copies need comparison. Instruments need calibration. New science creates new demands. By placing international standards under a shared framework, the Metre Convention helped turn the metric system from a French national reform into a global measurement structure. Britain offers a useful example of the slow, partial nature of metrication. British industry increasingly saw advantages in metric units during the 20th century, and in 1965 the government supported a sector-by-sector move towards metrication. A parliamentary statement that year described it as desirable for British industries to adopt metric units over time until metric could become the primary system of weights and measures. Yet everyday life did not become fully metric overnight. Britain still uses miles for road distances and pints for draft beer and cider, while science, medicine, manufacturing, and most regulated trade largely use metric units. This mixture may look untidy, but it shows how measurement systems survive through custom as well as law. The United States took a different path. Metric units are legal, and federal policy encourages voluntary metric use, but U.S. law still permits both SI and U.S. customary units. NIST describes American policy as one that places the decision and pace of metric use largely in the hands of companies, organizations, and individuals. By the 20th century, however, the direction of travel was clear. The metric system had survived resistance because it solved problems older systems could not. Its next transformation would come not from politics, but from science itself. The modern metric system is not simply a set of convenient units. It is the measurement language of science, engineering, medicine, manufacturing, and global trade. Its success lies in coherence. Units relate to one another in predictable ways, and that makes calculations easier, especially when precision matters. In 1960, the 11th General Conference on Weights and Measures formally established the international system of units known as SI from the French Système International d'Unité. BIPM's concise SI summary states that the SI has been periodically updated since then to reflect advances in science and new measurement needs. The SI eventually developed around 7 base units, the second, metre, kilogram, ampere, Kelvin, mole, and candela. From these, other units can be derived. A Newton, for example, describes force. A joule describes energy. A watt describes power. These units are not random additions, but part of an interconnected system. That is why SI works so well in technical fields. It gives scientists and engineers a common structure rather than a pile of unrelated measures. International trade also depends on this trust. A pharmaceutical dose, aircraft component, food shipment, or electronic device may cross borders several times before reaching its final user. If every country used different measurement assumptions, modern supply chains would become slower, riskier, and more expensive. Shared units do not remove every problem, but they remove a huge source of avoidable confusion. Measurement has also become more precise than the founders of the metric system could have imagined. The original meter was tied to a calculated fraction of the Earth's meridian, then represented by a metal bar. Later definitions moved away from physical artifacts and towards reproducible, natural phenomena. In 1983, the meter was defined in relation to the speed of light in vacuum, making it far more stable than any metal object. The kilogram took longer to escape the physical world. For more than a century, the international standard kilogram was a carefully guarded metal cylinder. This was practical, but philosophically awkward. If the object changed, even by an unimaginably tiny amount, the definition changed with it. The metric system's original dream had been to base measurement on nature, yet the kilogram still depended on a thing in a vault. That changed in the 21st century. On the 16th of November 2018, the 26th General Conference on Weights and Measures voted to revise the SI, and on the 20th of May 2019, 4 base units, the kilogram, ampere, Kelvin, and mole, were redefined using fixed numerical values of constants of nature. NIST describes this as a major shift in which the modern metric system's 7 base units could all be derived from universal constants. This may sound remote from everyday life, but it matters. The more precise technology becomes, the more measurement matters. GPS, medical imaging, semiconductor manufacturing, climate science, space exploration, and quantum technologies all depend on standards that can be reproduced anywhere with the right equipment. The metric system began as a revolutionary attempt to simplify markets and taxes. It became the skeleton of the modern technological world. Today, the metric system is so widespread that many people barely notice it. Food labels, medicine doses, laboratory data, weather reports, athletics, engineering drawings, and school science all depend on metric units. Even countries that retain older measures in everyday speech often use metric units in science, medicine, manufacturing, and international trade. the metric system has become less a French invention than a global operating system. Its power lies in predictability. Once someone understands meters, grams, and litres, the larger and smaller units follow logically. That makes the system easier to teach and easier to scale. Children may still have to learn the names, but they are not required to memorize a maze of unrelated conversions. The decimal structure gives the system its quiet brilliance. Yet older systems persist because measurement is cultural as well as practical. In Britain, people may buy petrol by the litre but describe a journey in miles. They may measure their height in feet and inches while reading medicine labels in milligrams. In the United States, customary units remain deeply embedded in road signs, construction, cooking, retail, and public language. Once a system is woven into tools, laws, habits, and identity, replacing it is not just a technical change, it is social rewiring. There is also a cost problem. Converting signs, machinery, packaging, training materials, and regulations can be expensive. Industries that already work internationally often use metric units because the benefits are obvious. Other sectors may see less immediate gain. That is why metrication often advances unevenly: science first, industry next, public life last. The United States is the clearest example of partial adoption. Its scientists, military, medical professionals, and many manufacturers use metric units extensively, but public life still relies heavily on customary measures. Federal policy supports voluntary use of SI as the preferred system for trade and commerce, while still allowing US customary units. The irony is that the metric system is both revolutionary and conservative. It was born from radical Enlightenment ambition, but it succeeded because it proved useful. It did not conquer the world in a single dramatic moment. It spread through classrooms, laboratories, factories, treaties, trade agreements, and technical standards. Its greatest victories were often boring, which is exactly how infrastructure usually wins. The story of the metric system is really the story of humanity trying to agree on reality. How long is a metre? How much is a kilogram? How hot is a Kelvin? These sound like dry questions, but they underpin almost everything modern societies build, buy, test, prescribe, launch, and repair. From the chaos of local measures to constants of nature, the metric system has travelled a remarkable distance. It began with revolutionary France trying to impose reason on a disorderly world. It became an international language of precision, and whether we notice it or not, it now helps hold that world together, one decimal place at a time. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact History, part of the Compact Histories Network. Please don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you are listening so that you don't miss any future episodes. And consider leaving us a rating or a review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find new episodes at compacthistories.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, warfare, science, mysteries, true crime, and disasters. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/history and click on the coffee cup to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.